Discretionary listener participation is advised for the following pro wrestling podcast.
Hola, Croquiachamoa means I love the Stick to Wrestling podcast so much. I want to thank Bobby Vinton for writing and performing that awful song from God knows how long ago about Stick to Wrestling, where if you give us 60 minutes, perhaps indeed, we'll give you a wicked good and raw bone podcast. My name is John McAdam, and this is Stick to Wrestling, primarily a podcast that features classic wrestling from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Before we get rolling, I want to invite you to join our Facebook group. You just have to put in search Stick to Wrestling and it comes right up. It's a cool group where we talk about wrestling pictures, results, other stuff, baseball, basketball, you name it. I was going to invite you to follow me on Twitter, but I can't log into that account. I don't know what's going on, so this might not be the week you want to do that. Before I introduce the show, before I tell you what the show is going to be about, it's about the 1997 Survivor Series. Don't turn off your listening device because we're not going to harp on the Montreal Screwjob. I feel like everything that has been said about that needs to be said has already been said. Yes, we'll touch upon it, but that is not what this podcast is going to be. It's going to be a review of the show in total, and I want to bring on my guest. I feel like it's interesting how this person landed as a guest on Stick to Wrestling. Back when I was on Twitter, and hopefully I'll return, this person I saw put out a tweet, and it said, if you want to have me on your podcast and you want to review a show, I will watch that show and I will furiously take notes by hand on a notebook. And I'm like, okay, you're on, sir. And it turns out he's in the wrestling business. He is the ring announcer for Game Changer Wrestling. Emil J., thank you for coming on, sir.
John McAdam, thank you so much for having me. I hate to put a date on any of us because I guess we're all much older than we have any right feeling like right now. But man, late 90s, I grew up reading your website, man, those listings that you made for all your comp tapes and everything like that. That's how I learned about a good deal of wrestling history. So just being able to sit here and talk to you about a very historic show is a very fun thing for me.
I find that hilarious, and I'll tell you why. Coming in, I was like, okay, this guy's going to have no idea who I am. We had no idea who the other one was, but we kind of knew each other. And here we are. Yeah,
that's the great thing about the wrestling community, especially the way it is now. On the surface, we've never met each other in real life, but it feels like, oh, yeah, I know that guy. I've read his website for years and years and years. Yeah, sure, I know that. That's how it feels. We don't know each other, but at the same time, we have this same common familiar bond that brings us
Excellent.
together.
So you work for Game Changer Wrestling. My understanding is that you're the ring announcer, but can you tell us a little bit about anything else you do for that promotion?
Yeah, now, things have been changing a little bit over the past few months. We've been making moves to become more widely accessible to more people. So now instead of individual payment, per show, all of our events are available on Fight Plus. You can stream them live as they happen. Plus, watch our old video on demand stuff. It's very similar to Peacock or the WWF Network. But I say that to say this, a lot of the time now on the live broadcasts and on the VOD, not only will you see me in the middle of the ring, see and hear me in the middle of the ring doing ring announcing, but I'm also working with Dave Prazak, doing commentary for many of these events as of late. So yeah, it's great. I get to do the ring announcing, get that different energy, and then I'm able to just sit back and watch the wrestling that's taking place right there, and being able to talk about it with Prazak, and call the action with him is great. It's another person that, I came into my formative years, listening to in Ring of Honor and IWA Mid-South and promotions like that. And now getting to work with him side by side. I have the time of my life at GCW shows, man. There's nothing.
I'll tell
like
you
it.
what, a couple of things. Number one, I love Dave Prazak. If you could put in a good word to have him as a guest sometime, I would greatly appreciate it. I would love to have him on. Secondly, I'm going to make a promise, okay? I wrote that down, Fight Plus. When football season is over, maybe not even, like when college football season is over, beginning mid-January, I will subscribe to Fight Plus for at least a month to check out Game Changer Wrestling. I do want to see it. So anyway, we are going to talk about the 1997 Survivor Series. Emil, I really regret not going to that show. I could have. It's a 4-hour trip north to Montreal. No big deal. Spend Friday and Saturday in Montreal having fun. Sunday afternoon having fun. Go see the Survivor Series and then drive home. It was so doable, and I skipped it. And, yeah, I could have seen history firsthand.
Yeah, I was 10 years old, going on 11 at this point in time. So obviously living in New Jersey, right outside of Atlantic City. So, I didn't have, that same possibility, but I did, get this show on pay-per-view. I do know that for a fact. I didn't know how historic this show is actually going to be.
No, nor did I. I knew there was stuff going on. Let's be honest. I got the Observer. I was on the internet by this point. The world was changing. If you were enough of a wrestling fan to plunk down $25 of 1997 money to see this event, chances are you followed wrestling on the internet and you knew something that was going on with Bret Hart. And even if you didn't, the story that he was leaving the WWF for WCW made the newspapers in Calgary, Montreal, and Toronto, and God knows where else.
Yeah, I remember we got on the internet in my house. I got internet capabilities and a computer and everything in, I think it was October of 96. And of course, as soon as you get online back then, it didn't take me very long to find the wrestling portion of the internet. And I do recall seeing, stories and rumors about Bret Hart, but I don't think anybody could have expected just exactly what was going to go down. And, they even kind of talk about it on commentary. Like, they make mention early on in the show, where's McMahon? And JR is like, he's pretty busy right now. So this had to be evolving as the actual show itself was on the air. Just knowing how things are in the wrestling business, this was definitely an ongoing situation even after that light went red.
Yeah, definitely. I was very surprised what happened, and I'll probably mention this again, but I wasn't watching it live. I was recording it, and I was watching an NFL game, their Sunday night game, and I finished watching that, and I log on to America Online, if anyone remembers that dinosaur, and I get an email from John Muse, and John's like, I don't know what he said something about if you recorded or did you watch the Survivor Series, but if you didn't, drop what you're doing and go watch it. I won't spoil it for you. And I'm like, oh, by the way, this is how long I've known John Muse, who's been on this show and is going to be back very soon, hopefully. And I went and watched it. I couldn't believe what I saw. Didn't know what to make of it.
Yeah, watching it unfold, I knew there was gonna, like I said, I knew there was something going on, but, trying to figure out what exactly is going to happen and understand the ins and outs of it no matter if I'm online or not. Like, I'm only 10
Yeah.
years old, watching wrestling for like 2 years at this point. Like, there's no real way for me to reasonably say like, oh yeah, like that was a regular occurrence, because this was, I mean, it's really a tale of, two events where, the first part is pretty much like, up until the main event, it's like your basic show, your basic wrestling event. And then it just gets crazy. Just the wheels fall off.
There's no way if I were 10 years old watching that, I would have been able to get my mind around it. But I open up like, we're not going to go on and on about the screw job. And then we turn around and do it. So stick to wrestling that was. Anyway, they opened with a really good montage of the Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, their whole history together. It really dated back to the 92 Survivor Series, but they kind of stayed away from that. They sort of acted like the story began WrestleMania, the 1996 WrestleMania, the year before, and went on from there, and how Bret felt like he got screwed out of the title at that WrestleMania, and now we're finally seeing the rematch. I thought they did a really good job in a very short amount of time with that.
Yeah, and they could have gone even deeper if they wanted to in the whole history between Bret and Shawn, if they really wanted to. I mean, really, where the meat on the bone is the Iron Man match and everything like that, WrestleMania 12, and the fallout from that, and the real life issues leading into Survivor Series 97. But really, if they wanted to, they could have gone all the way back to like 1990. And depending on how real, quote unquote, real they wanted to get with the presentation of this, like, Bret, obviously screwed out of the title at, WrestleMania 12. He's got a gripe. It went to a draw. It should be, in a result of a draw, the champion retains his championship, as in every, wrestling, stipulation that's ever been. But this, we needed to have a winner, and Bret felt slighted by that. Now, if they wanted to, they could have put a whole different spin on that, and Shawn Michaels could have said, listen, I really won the tag team titles off of you guys way back 7 years ago, but something happened and they didn't recognize the title match. Did I complain about it? Did I whine about it? Did I do anything? No. So what's the matter with you? They could have dipped into that if they really wanted to.
That's a good bit of booking. I like that.
Like, they have the footage, they could have built it up that much if they really wanted to. But, really, like I said, the real meat on the bones was, the fallout from WrestleMania 12. But just to cap it from 96 into 97 would be really doing it a service to the rivalry that they really did have from that, tag match on Saturday night's main event or whatever it was. And then, like you mentioned, Survivor Series 92, and then like that unofficial, who's the best in a World Wrestling Federation conversation that would always come up. It was always Bret and Shawn. It was always those two, especially for me growing up when I did, that those are always the two wrestlers people brought up, the kids brought up the most. And there was so much history between those two in the main event. And that video package really told a great story. Little clips from each of their interviews over the previous months leading up to this event. I hadn't seen this show for so long, but watching it back, and I would just hear the first couple of words of like a soundbite, and I knew what the soundbite would be. It sticks in your brain like all these years later, like, you're a zero, my hero, and like Bret calling him a degenerate, and all that. Like, those are just like lines that I can hear over and over in my head for my formative years as a wrestling fan.
It was really something. I mean, Vince McMahon pushed the envelope with those two. I remember getting a phone call from someone who said, guess what happened at Raw last night? And they're like, Bret knocked Shawn Michaels' lights out backstage. And it turned out that was a bit of an exaggeration, but Bret definitely got the best of him, and they went at it for real.
Yeah.
Quick aside, Emil, WrestleMania, I forget what number it is, the WrestleMania from 1996 had that Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels Iron Man match. Your honest opinion, my opinion was that it was a really good match. I've had people tell me, no, they found it incredibly boring, including someone who attended it live. What did you think of it?
I haven't seen that match in a very, very long time. I do remember the last time that I attempted to watch it, I kind of veered on the side that it was a little bit boring in the beginning, but when it got down the stretch, I think it really came together. I don't know if I would hold that same opinion today because, it's been a very long time since I've seen it. I remember watching it live. It was actually WrestleMania 12 is actually the first pay-per-view I ever ordered in my home. So that kind of had me additionally jazzed up that day. But I don't feel strongly one way or the other just because it's been so long.
Okay. You know what? I probably haven't seen it in 10 years either. I just remember, getting online in 1996 being, wow, I liked the match. I didn't think it was a match of the decade candidate or anything, but I liked it. And, people like throwing stuff at me. Like, boo, you suck. But anyway, the opener for Survivor Series 1997, the New Age Outlaws and the Godwins defeated the Headbangers and the Blackjacks, John Hawk and Barry Windham. First thing, 3 of these guys would go on. Their opening match, they're not even a little bit big names yet, but the New Age Outlaws were going to become huge, and so was John Layfield.
Yeah, and looking at this match, I don't know if you'd be able to make that assertion. Definitely not for Bradshaw. For the New Age Outlaws, perhaps. But this is very early in the New Age Outlaws.
Very early.
Very early. I don't even think, they don't even have that name really yet, New Age Outlaws. And this is still weeks before they put the Legion of Doom through the table on Monday Night Raw. And to me, that's when the New Age Outlaws solidified themselves as a team, as a thing, as something that I should be worried about. You know what I mean? Something that I should pay attention to. Up until then, it was Jesse James and Rockabilly doing something a little different. Then when they got locked up with the Legion of Doom and they started becoming not necessarily members of D-Generation X, but sort of lackeys or the Goon Squad for DX. That's when I was like, oh, wait a second. These guys got something to them.
I mean, when they first started pushing the New Age Outlaws, my honest opinion, and you're right, they didn't even have that name at this point. I was like, they are way over pushing these two. And, as soon as Shawn left, after WrestleMania, they put them in that faction and pushed them to the moon, and it drew. It did well. There's, what am I going to say? But yeah, they're just starting out here as a tag team, and as that run against the LOD went on, I was like, you got to be kidding me. They are way over pushing these guys. One thing, this was not a good match at all, in my opinion, Emil. Bad opener.
As I was watching this, I wrote a couple of things here. The match, I didn't think it was that good. But while I was watching it, I did note that I do miss wrestlers like the Godwins and the Blackjacks, because you don't really see too many wrestlers like that in today's landscape. Just big, mean, brute brawler types. Big, meaty guys. You don't see a lot of that type in today's mainstream wrestling or any other sort of wrestling. So, I do miss those sort of wrestling archetypes in today's product, but that's not to say that I thought that it was necessarily a great display of wrestling acumen.
No, I thought the most interesting part of this match was noticing that there was a girl in the front row with a Sting's Crow face paint. I mean, the Blackjacks.
Yes.
Montreal, you got to love the place. The Blackjacks were big in the early 70s. That was 25 years before this event. And even as just another tag team, I mean, that just never got off the launching pad.
Yeah, and, today it's a much different story than it was 25 years ago. I mean, today, right now as we record on a Monday, we are 25 years removed from Survivor Series 97, but that's not going to stop modern WWF from talking about Survivor Series 1997. If they want to talk about it, they will still talk about it to this moment. I say that to say this, like, if you're in 1997, there is no chance in hell that they are going to broadcast something or put something over from 1972 in the 1997 landscape. That is not the way that their promotion or product existed. They did not look to the past like that. But nowadays, with, the network and things like that, and just the way you can obtain information, I suppose it's more easily accessible. Like, yeah, they'll talk about something from 25 years ago now. Whereas back then, they wouldn't even bring up something that happened sometimes 25 minutes ago.
No, it was strictly, hey, this is what we're doing, and this promotion pretty much has no history whatsoever. All right, the next match, if you thought this match was bad, wait till we get to the Truth Commission in an elimination match, defeating DOA, which is basically Bryan Adams and the Harris twins. I mean, and the first two matches were pretty long matches. Well, this one was like 20 minutes. Yeah. And just, here's the thing. I am someone who does not like to be the 20 millionth person to bash Vince Russo. But here's one of his weaknesses, and that is that, as the booker or whatever he was, it's like he doesn't understand that you can't put these guys out there. None of them can work even a little bit. So what you have to do is, keep if you're going to have a match like this, keep it short, gimmick it up to hide the fact that all of these guys are terrible, and they didn't do that. They just did a straight match.
Yeah, they just kind of left them out there to suffer. And, basis of comparison here, the first match and the second match, we're not looking at a whole lot of renowned, quote unquote, workers or anything like that throughout any of these, 16 wrestlers throughout the two matches. But, as I watched the first match, I noted how, I miss guys like the Godwins and the Blackjacks. I even put down, like, I would like to see the Godwins at least for one tour in All Japan Pro Wrestling or against the Nasty Boys in this era, just to see what it looks like. There's still things that I would like to see those wrestlers do. However, when I was watching Truth Commission and DOA, the first thing I wrote down before the match got started, I said, I can't think of any two more dislikable stables in 2022 eyes. Wow. Like, looking at it in modern eyes, it's like you got these militant South African segregationists against this biker gang. None of that works in 2022 eyes. And even then, it wasn't palatable, really. Like, I didn't care. Like, I then went on to note, Jack Specific made figures of all of these guys. And I can't believe it. Like, and I had figures of all of these guys. Why did I have an 8-ball skull figure? Why did I have a recon or sniper figure? I don't know. But they were produced.
You were a completionist at a young age. That's not a bad thing. But the Truth Commission, let's talk about them for a minute. This was one of the first gimmicks that the WWF threw out there that resembled a lot of their future gimmicks that, they had Adam Rose maybe 7 or 8 years ago. His gimmick was he's in a party bus and they're having a big fun party and he's on his way to the WWF. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, okay, what are they going to do with this when they get it into the arena? And the answer was they didn't know. Another example, Fandango, a ballroom dancer. That's his gimmick. He can do it and he can wrestle. But what do you do with it once you get it to the arena? Who is he going to feud with? What storylines are you going to have? Are you going to have someone injure his leg so he can't dance? I don't know the whole thing. That sounds pretty stupid. Truth Commission was, as far as I can think of, the original on this. Like, even if it gets over, what do you do with it?
Yeah. Where do you go? Just how and why? Like what is their motivation against anybody? And how do you make it reasonable for the mainstream person in America? How do you put the Truth Commission forward in a way to make these people either care or think it's in good taste?
I mean, yeah, either one, care or in good taste. Good point. Emil and our audience, I will confess that leading up to a show like this, where I review an event like Survivor Series 1997, I will go out and I will read reviews and updates or whatever on the show because sometimes I miss something. But in this match, there were 7 eliminations, and this was pointed out to me, and 4 of them were by the sidewalk slam. And it's like you have to book better than that. But then again, the sidewalk slam is easy to execute. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the success rate that Dino Bravo would have been very envious of with his side suplex or whatever that was his finish back in the
when he couldn't move. Yeah,
and like it's a good wrestling move, and it's a great wrestling move. The bigger you are, but I don't know if it gets 4 separate pinfalls in one match. As I was watching this, I wrote, "Who put this shit together?"
I feel like apologizing for asking you to watch this match.
Well, I mean, I just don't know what they were thinking. Like, I don't know I'm looking at a match like that on paper where really the heat of the Truth Commission is with the Jackal. That's where the heat comes from. He's got huge Kurgan the Interrogator, Recon and Sniper are both large individuals as well. They don't talk, but here's the Jackal, smaller in stature, but with a bigger mouth than all of them put together. But in this match, they didn't treat it like that at all, really, because they do whatever. There's an elimination. Jackal finds himself as a legal man. There's a little bit of something, and then boom, he just gets eliminated.
Yeah, and he goes outside the ring in the middle of the match and starts doing commentary. I'm like, okay, this is supposed to be what saves this match, and it's not working.
No, and realistically, like, I don't understand why they did it this way, because I'm looking at the match. They didn't need to change anything. Really. What this match needed to be was the sole survivors. I mean, that's a weird term anyway. Can you have more than one sole survivor? Not really, but that's what Survivor Series language has made me think of. The winning team should have been the Truth Commission with Kurgan and Jackal together.
Yeah.
There was no need to eliminate Jackal and send him to the commentating area. Like, the heat needed to be like Jackal coming in, doing a couple things, getting out, never really getting anything on him. And then if you look back at the way the finish was, they could have easily done everything that they did at the end of the match with the blind tag and the scoop into this fourth side slam of the evening, or the match rather, and it wouldn't have changed or altered how the match went at all. As a matter of fact, it would have made the match better if they would have kept Jackal in there and had him be the driving force to get the heat from the crowd, because like as soon as the Jackal came and went so unceremoniously, I was just like, what's the point of this? Who put this together? And why don't they realize how easy of a story this really should be? Like, it felt like just bullshit to get the Jackal on the commentary. And that's not where Don Callis needed to be. Like, he needed to be a stooge in the match, not
no,
off
I agree.
To the side.
I totally agree. The most entertaining part of this match, in my opinion, were three of the signs I saw in the audience. Coming in third place, getting the bronze medal, the sign simply said, "Domino's Pizza sucks." And it's like, okay, tell me something I don't know. Number 2 sign just said 2 words, Howard Stern. Montreal is the last place I think Howard Stern would get over, just a different culture. But number 1, the best sign I saw during this match, Undertaker is not a homo. Thank you for that information, sir.
Yes, I wrote that down before, because we got a very good look at that sign prior to the entrances of the teams coming at. Like, it was just like in the aisle, just dead center. And, I thought that was funny too, because like those signs are just like what do you want to call it? I guess like a microcosm of, society
in Montreal in the 90s. Yes. Just, very, very simply stated, Undertaker is Undertaker is not a homo. Like, no explanation point. Just here you go, pal.
Yeah. And, I saw other signs out there. There was one I saw that just said, "Fuck USA," that made air. Like, there was no blurring or censorship of it at all. Like, I don't even know if anybody came to take the sign away from the guy. It's certainly I hate to say it, but a sign of the times.
I mean, it's what Vince McMahon wanted. He wanted his shows, both Raw and the main events to be, just chaotic and, anarchy, and he got it, and obviously we are in a different place today. All right, we've got Team Canada in an elimination match against Team USA. Doug Furnas, Phil LaFawn, Davey Boy Smith, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Team Canada, only one guy is a Canadian, but whatever.
Yeah.
Against Big Van Vader, Gold Dust, Mark Merrow, and Steve Blackman, who had debuted the Monday before doing the fan out of the crowd gimmick, running in while Team Canada was beating up on Vader. Emil, I have a real problem with that, because, I mean, you don't want people, I can just go in the ring and start punching these guys, because, fan out of the crowd is soon going to be fan in a coma.
Yeah, I don't ever think that this is a very questionable angle to run. Depending on how it's presented, I guess you could get away with it. But the way that it was presented here, and I remember feeling this way at the time when I watched that episode of Monday Night Raw before Survivor Series 97. I remember, watching it and who is this guy? I remember being like, this is weird. And again, I wrote down, Steve Blackman's debut story is weird.
Yes.
They just so happen to be, I guess they were somewhere in the Pennsylvania area, because he's a Annville, Pennsylvania native.
They were in Hershey.
Yeah, okay, which is not too far from Annville. So, I remember them putting that over, and I'm like, what is this? And then here comes Steve Blackman, and he pulls all these quote unquote Canadians off of Vader, and he beats up all these people, but then they get the advantage of him. Great. But then you see the visual of Vader, like, on top of this guy, like, protecting him, like,
Yes.
shielding him from the blows. And it's like, wow, look at the compassion of Big Van Vader. Like, that's never been his MO. Like, I don't know. It just seemed, and then they said, what did they say on commentary? Like, leading up to the match that, like, Vader paid Steve Blackman's bail.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, they said that, like, Vader paid his bail and he, like, went to Commissioner Slaughter to, like, put him in the match or something like that. Like, that is so insane to me because, like, it's really, like, it's the same thing as, like, if somebody ran onto the parquet at the Boston Garden and was like, yeah, Larry, pass it to me. I'm going to shoot a 3-pointer. And then Larry Burgess passes on the ball and he makes the shot. And they're like, yeah, we need to sign this guy. Like, that would never happen. It's so insane to me. Like, and plus, they also went to the lengths of, like, explaining how it might work in real life. And that is still so, like, ridiculous.
It really was. You know, I was watching this and, you know, I knew who Steve Blackman was. I knew him from Calgary from, like, you know, 87, 88. And he missed a bunch of spots. And I was just like, you know, okay, how long has this guy been in the business? And, you know, he's screwing up. So I go check on Wiki, and it turns out, listen to this. Blackman, I did not know this. Blackman contracted malaria and dysentery while wrestling in South Africa in 1989 and was essentially bedridden for 2 years. I mean, you know, bedridden for 2 years, not what I want. And it just shows you, like, you know, maybe I don't like this particular wrestler from the 80s or 90s. You know, you, Emil, the audience might like him. But, you know, guys really had to make sacrifices to get over in the business back in the day. And, you know, this guy goes on the wrong trip and he's bedridden with malaria for 2 years.
Yeah, and, you know, it's so, especially at that time period, because, of course, like, you know, the territories are all dying out. Steve Blackman, he wrestled in Calgary Stampede. I had no idea about that at the time. I just thought it was like, oh, who's this guy? Like, whatever. Like, you know, obviously once, even at that point in time, to a 10-year-old who had been online for about a year at that point in time, like, even to me at that point in time, I'm like, people don't come out the crowd and know how to do this kind of stuff. I knew he wasn't just a fan, you know, like, civilians don't move like professional wrestlers, and they don't fight like professional wrestlers, you know, it's a certain thing that only exists within its own universe. And as soon as somebody, like, steps into it and acting that way, like, it's pretty clear to tell that they know what they're doing. But, like, I had no idea that he had a history at all. But, you know, looking back at that time with the territories drying up, you kind of had to go, you know, wherever would offer you, like, a tour or, you know, significant money or whatever, because you didn't really know where the business was going to wind up at that point in time. I mean, I guess what you had, WWF, NWA.
That's about it.
Stampede.
Yeah.
Memphis and World Class.
Well, by the time we got to the late 80s, the only place you were making any money was the WWF, the NWA, and the two Japan promotions. So you go on a tour like that so you can put it on your resume and hopefully get hired somewhere.
Yeah, and then on one of those tours, you never, like, international tours like that, you never know who's also going to be booked on that tour. You wrestle, you know, a wrestler that wrestles for another office, you know, in some other country, and then you have a good match with them. They put you over, they bring you in to that, you know, like, you kind of just have to, it's like today's independent wrestling scene where, you know, you get, when you're trying to get your name out there, you just take bookings from wherever you can just to get your name out there. But, like, that, comeback that Steve Blackman made, no matter how good he was in the ring or not, like, that's a hell of a comeback for a person, just to, like, be bedridden for 2 years with some sort of malaria strain and still be able to come back into being an active physical athlete. That's something to be very proud of. No matter how your output is after that, it doesn't matter.
No,
really.
I agree with you. And he looked like he was in tremendous shape, and he had great muscularity. Just 6 years later, so
Yes.
good for him. I mean, it's one of those things. Like, Steve Blackman to me was always like, he was okay in Stampede and he kind of sucked in the WWF. Then I read about, him getting through that. And it's just like, I'm very impressed by that. This match seems like more than anything, a showcase of Goldust's most recent turn. I did watch the Go Away Raw before this, the one that, took place 6 days earlier. And they did this weird angle where they're sitting there interviewing Marlena and Goldust, and she's all happy that they're back together after the Brian Pillman thing and we're a family again. And he just all of a sudden turns on her and says, this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be in this family anymore. And she's crying. It was a tough segment to get to. And now he's back to being Goldust with the words F you written on his face, forever unchained. And it seemed like the match, this match was just, it existed more to get his turn over than anything else. And things were going to get really bizarre with Dustin Runnels pretty soon.
Yeah, that's certainly one way to put it. Looking at this team, that both teams are rather slapped together. Granted, I know Team Canada, quote unquote, has like the loose Hart Foundation affiliation, even though Furnace and LaFon were never really a part of that outfit, technically. But like that American team was just like, it's your debut vehicle for Steve Blackman. It's your way to get into the Goldust Vader program, which, they had a match at Royal Rumble 98, which features one of the best finishes of all time at Luna Vachon, scorpion tailing off of that Vader bomb. So wait, you had Vader, you had Steve Blackman, you had Goldust, and who else was out there?
It was Mark Merrow, who I was always confounded by his WWF push.
That'll tell you, because like I just watched this match mere hours ago, and I just wrote for a header, America versus Canada. I didn't even remember Mark Merrow was in the match. Like, he's so forgettable. I'm trying to figure out, like, is there a different fourth person that they could have put in there? Like, it's like the most not cohesive.
No, I think they just wanted to get him on the show.
Yeah, they were like, oh, we got to get Mark. Well, more so Sable.
Two loud Sable chants during the match.
Yes, they wanted Sable on the show. I don't think they gave a shit what Mark Merrow was
You're probably
doing,
right.
and I think that's evident that they just threw him there. Like, okay, you can be the third most. Well, actually, on the babyface side, Mark Merrow is like the fourth important thing in that match behind Vader Goldust thing, Steve Blackman debut, Sable just being visible. At the end of all that, then it's Mark Merrow. And by that point in time, well, what are you going to do? And what he does do, and I made note of this, that was probably the ugliest Merrow salt I ever saw him hit on Doug Furnace. Like, I don't know if, like, Doug Furnace just doesn't know how to catch a moonsault or what happened there, but it was ugly. I did not like that one at all. Like, oof.
Yeah, one last thing about, what, they probably had Merrow on, A, to get Sable on the show, but B, they probably wanted Merrow on the show to justify the contract they gave him. They gave him a decent deal to move out of WCW and into WWF. And they, like I said, they probably needed to justify it. One last thought on this match. It's not really on the match. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn were considered kind of a big acquisition by the WWF when they got them. And man, did they bomb in the WWF. And I'm not just blaming them that, they didn't fit and the WWF didn't know how to use them.
I'll just put it like this. I mean, they made and manufactured Truth Commission figures, which I owned, but they never made and manufactured Furnas and LaFawn figures. Like, damn. Truth Commission got toys before y'all?
And they were there for like a year and a half.
Yeah, they Furnas and LaFawn were there before the Truth Commission, and they were there after the Truth Commission, and they still never got figures where the Truth Commission did. And it's just like, damn. Like, I remember I was a weird kid. Like, I wanted my Furnas and LaFawn toys. Like, the first time I saw Doug Furnas do a dropkick, I was like, yeah, awesome. Phil LaFawn pulling out crazy suplexes. Yeah, these guys are great. I love them. But, like, I don't really think that the WWF was the place for them. I think Furnas and LaFawn get more over and more notoriety if they go to WCW instead. But I don't know. Another thing that came out of this match for me, I don't know if I'm a glutton for punishment or what, but I want to see a full-length Vader versus Jim Neidhart match from around this time. I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. They had a little back and forth in this match, and I was like, you know what? I wouldn't mind seeing that for about 5.5 more minutes.
I mean, it sounds like kind of a raw filler match, but I wouldn't turn it off.
Oh, exactly. I don't mean in terms of like, I want to see them open a pay-per-view for 18 minutes, but, in the style of just a good match that they would put on TV to eat up 7 or 8 minutes. Yeah, I think that would be a fun match to watch. I don't know. I feel like Neidhart was a little bit motivated against Vader than he typically was at this point in time.
No, I hear what you're saying. The one guy I felt bad for after the Bret Hart incident was Jim Neidhart because, he wanted to be let go. And in order for that to happen, they had to embarrass him on Monday Night Raw like 2 or 3 weeks later. But anyway, moving on, this wasn't a match. They had a contest for something called a Super Supper with a WWF contestant where they called the person at home live on the show.
Yes.
Emil, I'd completely forgotten about this, but as I'm rewatching the event, I'm just like, oh no, these never go well. Why are they still doing this? This always flops miserably. And whoever it was that they got on the phone couldn't have been better, to the point where I'm thinking maybe she was a plant.
Yeah. Especially the way that Jerry Lawler played off of that conversation. Like, it felt a little bit too perfect. But that said, it was a good gag. If it was planned, great gag. If it wasn't planned, well, I mean, kudos to Jerry Lawler, because if that was a shoot, Lawler, through his facial reactions, carries that segment, just working with whatever is happening at that point in time.
I mean, my guess is that it wasn't. My guess is that it wasn't a work. They just got really lucky this time. I mean, they had done that 3 or 4 times previously, and it was just like dead air in the middle of a pay-per-view.
Yeah, I remember like the first In Your House. They gave away the house through like the phone number thing. Oh, at SummerSlam just 3 months prior, they had the deal with the, what was it, a casket that was filled with $1 million or something like that. And you had to have like, there was some sort of sweepstakes or something with that.
They had it set up where there was no way that $1 million was given away. But anyway, now we finally have what I think is a good and interesting match. It's Kane, who is a very new character at this point, defeating Mankind. He had just given up his Dude Love gimmick to go back to being the vicious Mankind. I thought it was a good match. Mick Foley took some incredible bumps in this match. I mean, he did the elbow from the apron, which, can't be comfortable. He gets hit in the face with the ring stairs, something I would never let someone do to me. He takes a bump from the top rope, does a flip, and lands on the concrete floor on his back. And no one even talks about it anymore because Hell in the Cell was so crazy. But, I mean, he was phenomenal on this night.
Yeah, I forgot just how good this match was. I mean, and was this like the first match that Kane had as a character on television?
I believe it was. I think he just beat guys up randomly before this.
Yeah, I think that's like, it would be like a slap together match. It would be like a WCW Nitro match, where it's just like two random people against each other, which WWF very rarely did. But it would be like a slap together match, and then like a minute and a half later, like the lights would go off or turn red, and here comes Kane, if it even took that long. It was interesting at that point in time just seeing what Kane would do. I kind of like the mood lighting. It's a little hokey, but it's pretty cool at the same time. Different.
I'm like, let's talk about that. They had a crazy storyline by pro wrestling standards in 1997 coming into this. You've got The Undertaker, whose long lost, thought to be dead brother, Kane, is really alive, and he's being controlled by Paul Bearer. And he's kind of a Jason from Friday the 13th character. And you have the red lighting in the match, which is something that had never been done before. I knew a lot of people in 1997 who were really upset by this. They were like, no, this goes way outside the boundaries of how I define pro wrestling, and it's wrong and it's stupid and all that. And my take by this point was pro wrestling. What is pro wrestling? It is self-defining. You can't just say, no, this isn't pro wrestling. I did it myself in 1984 when Tuesday Night Titans debuted. I was like, this is not wrestling. So that was my moment. But I knew a lot of people who were really upset over that character and that storyline. And I liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. Like, I remember like the next day at school after Kane debuted at the Hell in a Cell, or at Bad Blood during the Hell in a Cell match, and like all of my classmates are talking about how cool Kane was and like how cool this new guy is. And yeah, it definitely worked, at least in my little environment. Like all the kids in my school were all about Kane. They thought he was cool. They liked the lighting. They liked the look. They liked the
entrance music.
Yeah, the music. And, I thought it was cool because at that point in time, like 97, like Undertaker had moved away from like the zombie stuff a bit. Like he wasn't doing the sit up every time he was like getting up from his back off of the mat anymore. Like he wasn't doing that as like every time, but like when Kane like would come in and would do that, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like I thought that was like the coolest touch, that like Kane was acting the way that like original Undertaker would.
Good point.
But like with a little bit, it was a little more, there was like a little bit more snap to it.
It was a lot more edgy, in my opinion.
Yeah. It was like, it was a little scarier, a little spookier. Like there was more snap to it, I think. Cause I think, like, I'm just like trying to think of this now, like off the top of my head, but like, I think the thing that made the setup for the Undertaker to work is the fact that he did it slowly and methodically, and it was creepy and weird and spooky like that. But when Kane would do it, he did it a little bit quicker, and it gave off a different vibe. It was like, it made me feel like Kane was more of a serial killer or something like that. Like he was just a little bit more heinous, a little bit more violent or something. I don't know what it was, but just in the speed of the sit-up and how, and not only that, but he would do the sit-up and then quickly turn his head.
Yes.
Yeah, he would like snap his head over to like where whoever just did something to him was. Like, I was like, oh man, that's like, it's the same thing, but executed ever so slightly different that made it feel so much of a different aspect to me.
I remember him debuting. They were talking about Kane on TV, how Undertaker has this long-lost brother. And then they have that Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, which to me gets consideration for match of the decade. It was that good, and it was so ahead of its time. And you've got this like 5+ star match. It's nearing its end. And all of a sudden there's this like loud explosion, and that music starts playing. And this guy in this red suit shows up, and he rips the door off the cage while Jim Ross is screaming, "That's gotta be Kane." And I thought it was fantastic. You might have been 10. I was 32, yeah. And I loved it. But one last thing about this match. I mean, Mick Foley pretty much, he did an absolutely clean job. I should say Mankind did a very clean job. And Undertaker was on offense most of the match. Not Undertaker, but Kane. You pretty much mopped the floor with him. And it tells you something about wrestling because people have short memories. Did it hurt Mankind? No, it didn't. It didn't matter at the end of the day. And, this talk that's always been there that, these wrestlers, they need to protect themselves. You're going to bury them doing something like that. Not always, and clearly not in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people get hung up on the result of one match. If the result of one match, if Mankind losing to Kane just totally killed off Mankind, well, then you didn't really have much of Mankind to begin with, did you? If one loss just totally takes you out of the game, like, it's wrestling. Okay, so you lost, come back and do something better next time. Like, use that as a tool. Like, it's fine. Like, and that's the thing. A lot of these guys are like, oh, I can't do this. My character wouldn't do that. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Like, there's a way in order, what, your character doesn't lose? What are you, 5? Come on.
Yeah.
Like, let's figure out a way to make this happen and make it work. Like, it's funny that I'm saying, let's find a way to make that happen as I'm literally looking at the main event of this match. They found a way to make it work. But like, a lot of times you'll hear that and it's like, if they would have lost there, if that happened, just one thing, and it derails you so far, then you really didn't have much at the start.
I completely agree. There was a match maybe 10 years ago between Brock Lesnar and John Cena, and Lesnar absolutely ragdolled Cena the entire match. And guess what? It didn't hurt John Cena. Next we have, and I thought this was crazy. I had completely forgotten about this. They have a deal where if you purchase the Survivor Series and you mail in a copy of your cable bill to the WWF proving that you have in fact purchased it, they would send you a dog tag, a WWF dog tag. And I, again, had completely forgotten about this, but my God, what I would do to go back 25 years ago and mail in a copy of my cable bill and get one of these and either still have it or sell it for millions on eBay. I mean, really a collector's item.
Yeah, and I'm an only child, and wrestling was my passion. Still is. I got good marks in school, very good grades, honor roll. So I say that to say this. I was very lucky and privileged to have been able to order pay-per-views almost on a monthly basis, not from both companies or from all three companies. Honestly, I was mostly purchasing WCW
Oh, wow.
pay-per-views. Yeah, I was more of a WCW guy. I like WCW a lot, but I did purchase Survivor Series 97 on pay-per-view, and I think it was the first WWF pay-per-view I think I had ordered since WrestleMania that year. As much as I love WCW, I couldn't justify ordering uncensored over WrestleMania. You just kind of got to see WrestleMania. Even though WrestleMania 13 was probably not as good as uncensored 97. And you know what? I feel pretty good just making that assertion after not seeing those shows for a while. That feels like a pretty safe bet. But all that said, having purchased the, monthly pay-per-view, I cannot believe that I didn't hassle my parents to send in a copy of the cable bill to one of the companies every month, because I should have the dog tags. I should have the inflatable King of the Ring 97 chair or whatever it was, or the koozies that they would give out, whatever it was. Like, I bothered my parents for everything else wrestling, whether it was magazines, action figures, trading cards. I mean, when WCW was putting out the wrestler branded like Matchbox cars or whatever, like, yeah, I would collect those too because they had wrestlers on it. I had wrestling everything, but I never sent in the cable bill to get the free gift. And like every time I go back and look at things like that, it's like, man, I could have had that cool thing.
For like 29 cents.
For free.
Cost of a stamp.
Yeah. Self-addressed stamped envelope, man.
Next, we have Vince McMahon doing an interview. And, Emil, this is something I want to talk about. History has kind of been rewritten that Vince McMahon turned heel because of 1997 Survivor Series, where Bret Hart kind of put him in that position. If you were watching the Raws previous to this, especially the one right before, it is obvious that Vince McMahon is turning heel, okay? At the time, I was kind of like, this is weird. They can't turn the owner of the company, can they? Oh, yes, they can. But, looking back, it was obvious. And now they're doing an interview with Vince backstage at this time. And once again, he makes it obvious that it's already in the bank. He is turning heel.
Yeah, and I honestly think the stage got set for the McMahon heel turn like a couple months before that. Like when he got stunned by Austin in Madison Square Garden, Vince was acting I feel like he was acting a little heelish at that point in time, which, kind of egging Austin on or whatever. And, at that point, Austin was stunning everybody because how he remained over. But I remember him stunning Vince was like a different thing, especially in Madison Square Garden. And I think that was kind of like perhaps the impetus, maybe Vince realized, oh shit, like I could get a reaction from getting stunned like this. Cause Vince never got touched. Like he took that, he took that chair shot during the Ric Flair, Roddy Piper thing, on Superstars.
That was
at one time.
91. And that was absolutely, just wow, what an angle. They actually got Vince McMahon involved. I mean, he did something with the manager of the year in 1977, but that's back when he was just the announcer. By 91, we all knew he was way more than just an announcer. But, like I said, I mean, he, on the Raw before, he's in the ring with Steve Austin, and he's got the Stooges in the ring with him, and he's like, keep him away from me, keep him away. And it's like, that's heelish.
Yep, absolutely. Doing the chicken shit heel manager routine.
Next up, we have Ken Shamrock, Ahmed Johnson, and the Legion of Doom against the Nation of Domination, which is Ron Simmons, Charles Wright, AC Connor, and The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. This felt like a little bit of a coming out party for two people. Number one, Rocky Maivia, and number two, Ken Shamrock. Maivia debuted the previous Survivor Series And we heard all the stories coming out of Memphis that Rocky Johnson's kid is going to be a no questions asked superstar. And they brought him in. They used him all wrong. They didn't learn from, Lex Luger, in my opinion, failed in 93 because they pushed him as this candy-ass babyface, and here they are again 3 years later, doing the same thing to Rocky Johnson's kid. They learned their lesson. They turned him heel. The only heat in this match really was the Rocky sucks chant. I mean, it wasn't a bad match, but it felt like the crowd had decided that this is something they just had to sit through before we get to Owen and Bret Hart's matches.
Yeah, I got that vibe too a bit. But that said, even though it was sort of a lame duck sort of match, I quite liked it.
It wasn't a bad match.
The very beginning, I love anytime that somebody gives Road Warrior Hawk a pile driver, and he's like, nope. There was a time where D'Lo gave him a pile driver, and D'Lo was like gloating about it. Hawk pops right back up and grabs D'Lo for the Hangman's neck breaker. I thought that was super cool. I like it when cause the pile driver has never hurt Road Warrior Hawk ever. Like, he popped up from Jerry Lawler's pile driver, I like it when that exists. You know what I mean? Like moves that just don't work on specific wrestlers, or moves that make specific wrestlers act specific ways, like Rick Rude getting an atomic drop, or like Greg Valentine even taking the atomic drop. Like, there's very unique ways that they would do that. And I thought, like, the pile driver sell, for lack of a better word, the pile driver reaction from Road Warrior Hawk is always fun for me. I also really like there was a sequence in there between Ken Shamrock and Kama Mustafa that I really liked, because it harkened back to the days of the Supreme Fighting Machine. He was able to bring out some of his little martial arts training. Was Charles Wright. I always liked that because I first got into wrestling in 1995, and not a lot of people are gonna go to bat for 1995 WWF is the best thing ever. But the wrestling you grew your first wrestling is always your favorite wrestling. I feel like that's a thing. So Kama, the Supreme Fighting Machine, was one of my first favorites because he was just one of the first guys that I saw, and I thought he was cool. He did cool kicks and stuff like that. So I thought it was neat to see him tangle with Ken Shamrock like that.
I have a book. It's called When It Was Real, and it was written by Nikita Brezhnev.
Is that a Crowbar Press? Well,
yes, it is. That's where I got it. And he did a year-by-year breakdown of every year in the WWF in the 1970s. And I went to 1976, and, the first thing he says was, yeah, this year was really lame, worst of the 70s. And I was like, wow, that was my year that I first fell in love with it. So, of course, I like 1976. So I can totally relate. That's the year you fall in love with wrestling is always going to be at least one of your favorites. I thought this was a good match, but there was one thing we talked about very recently on Stick to Wrestling, Starrcade 1987, which was almost exactly 10 years before this event. And we were talking about how difficult it was to book the Road Warriors as challengers to Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, because once you put the belt on the Road Warriors, they are not returning the favor. I mean, they were just, plain and simple. We do not do jobs. And now, not only are they doing jobs, but it's almost like they're there to put other people over. The New Age Outlaws come out and they attack Road Warrior Animal. They mock the Road Warriors. I mean, it was really symbolic that things were changing. And the Road Warriors, right around this time, I was looking at them and I'd always seen them as top-notch superstars until right around this point. It's like these guys are kind of a relic from the 80s.
It's one of those things where we talked about it with Mankind and Kane, where I was talking about, like, if one match decision or one match outcome, really changes your trajectory, then, what are you really doing? With the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, it was over the course of time where it wasn't just they lost once or they lost twice, but, they're in a position here where they are fodder in an elimination tag match, pretty much. Gradually, enough had been chipped away from them that it didn't really even feel monumental when Hawk and Animal got eliminated from the matchup.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It didn't feel like, oh my God, I can't believe I just saw Hawk get pinned.
It definitely felt like these guys were in the twilight of their careers and only 14, 15 years in, which is not a lot in pro wrestling. And it turned out, it was the twilight of their careers. Now we get to the two matches that we all really want to see. Steve Austin versus Owen Hart for the Intercontinental Championship. Austin has wrestled just a handful of matches since SummerSlam, which was 3 months earlier, where he suffered a legit bad back and neck injury while getting pile-driven incorrectly by Owen Hart. Owen Hart had just suffered a concussion, so they just kind of rolled this out there and did what they could. The match was over in 4 minutes. Owen brings Team Canada to the ring with him, all four guys, and Austin just stuns everybody, including Owen, and leaves them for dead. Owen Hart was a riot. He wears an Owen 316 shirt to the ring, and in the back it says, "I just broke your neck." That's comedy.
Yeah, I always wanted that shirt, but they never really sold it like that. I mean, which makes sense because it is kind of in poor taste. I don't remember that being sold.
I don't remember it either.
And they probably could have made a lot of money off of that.
Possibly, but like you said, it's kind of the anti-babyface t-shirt. But yeah, hey, Emil wants this shirt. If you're listening to this, find him on Twitter and get him one. It's Canada. They love the Hearts. And a lot of the fans were on Austin's side, but there was a loud break his neck chant in the middle of the match. And they did the pile driver spot a couple of times where Owen was trying to pile drive Austin again. And of course, Owen got body flipped over it. Overall, for what it was a short match. It needed to be short because of the physical condition of both guys. But for what it was, I thought it was a good match, Emil.
I feel like over time, especially during recaps and stuff that I would see over the years, people would talk about how the short length of the match really prohibited it from being a good match, but length and quality are not the same at all. And like you said, this match needed to be on the short side because of the physical capacity of Steve Austin, and it wasn't anything more than it needed to be, because realistically, this is not only is it the redemption thing, but it's also getting back on the right path. They were like, okay, Steve is good to go. We need to get back on track with him in the Intercontinental title, because I think the plan was always for Austin and The Rock to go at it over the Intercontinental title at that point in time, to elevate everything involved, Austin, The Rock, and the Intercontinental title in itself. But I think perhaps there was a little bit of a roadblock put in there with the whole injury thing happening, and I think they just made that shift, and they said, we got to get this back on Austin, because after that, Austin really didn't cross paths with Owen ever again. And I don't blame Austin for that, because if he didn't want to work with Owen after that accident, I don't blame him, because I always heard that Steve Austin was like, no, I don't think that we should do it that way. and Owen did it anyway.
Owen, yeah. Steve Austin never forgave Owen for what happened. I mean, Austin was saying that, Owen called him once after the pile driver to see if he was okay. And Steve was like, if I did that to someone, I'd be calling him every day. He thought Owen Hart was reckless with that pile driver. And damn, I mean, he dropped him right on his head with, like a dart just straight down. And, I mean, what can I say? I think at some point I would have forgiven Owen Hart. He apologized. I would have accepted that was an accident. But then again, it's not my neck and back. I mean, Austin probably should not have been wrestling this match. He was not giving good news by his specialist. But you got to remember, Austin in 1989, 1990, had a tiny little apartment in Dallas and he was talking about how he was eating raw potatoes for meals because he was that broke. Yeah. And now he's finally, after all these years, seeing gigantic money, and it's hard to turn that down.
Yeah, especially at that time, because even still in 96, 97, like, you don't have the luxury of a huge guaranteed contract like you do today. Like, knock on wood that, it doesn't happen, right? But say, for example, Seth Rollins, right? The top guy in the company, something goes wrong and he gets hurt and he's put on the shelf. Well, he's still able to make money on his contract and through his downside guarantee and everything like that. But even in 96, 97, you still had to make the towns to get the payoffs. These guys didn't have, $1 million guarantee contracts back then. And you know what? Cash is a hell of a motivator, especially when you're on such a rise like Steve Austin was at that time. Like, it was very risky that he came back into the ring, but looking back, all told, like, he made the right decision. I mean, would he have had a perhaps more lengthy career if he didn't come back so quickly? Probably. But would he have gotten as over as quickly with as much staying power? I don't know. You got to strike when the iron's hot.
Exactly. I mean, Austin made so much money, not only from making the towns, but, the merch was the merchandise was off the charts. Now, main event, Shawn Michaels challenging Bret Hart for the WWF Championship. This match had a big fight feel to me. It had that in 97. It felt like that again when I rewatched this. A little bit of background. I mean, these guys did not trust each other. Shawn would not get in the ring, for months and months against either Bret or Owen Hart because he was afraid that they might try to hurt him. Bret didn't trust Shawn for a number of reasons. He didn't trust that, Shawn flat out told him, no, I'm not going to do a job for you ever. And Bret's question, well, why would I ever do a job for you? So things were tense between these two. As I mentioned, they had a dressing room fist fight at one point. And Lawler comes out before the match, and he's like, well, both of these guys refuse to lose. I was like, oh, man.
That's so good. Like, I love stuff like that. Like, as a commentator, ring announcer, voice talent, whatever, whenever I'm able to make a comment that works in the realm of what we are presenting, but also works if you know who these people are in real life. I love moments like that where you're able to slip in a comment like that. And that's a very slick sentence there from Jerry Lawler. In the confines of what is being presented to us on the screen, yeah, both guys do refuse to lose. That's something that you say about tough competitors all the time. Yeah, I refuse to lose. But when you peel everything back, like, yeah, they really are not wanting to do this
No.
at all in real life. It's great.
Yeah, you'll hear that like during a football game. Both of these teams refused to lose, but it meant a little something else here. What did JR say? Oh, you'll never see this match again. And, it wasn't officially on WWF TV that Bret was leaving, but there's another foreshadowing. And again, before I get into the match, I mean, there's a sign in the crowd, Bret, why wait? Leave now. And then there's a Bret sold out chant, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Especially in Canada, too. Like, you would figure, like, they would give Bret a break or at least, like, understand. Like, if you know, how can I put this? Like, if you're already, like, so inside that you know Bret is leaving, how could you feel that it's him selling out?
Yeah. I mean, that was the big chant in the 90s anyway when someone left ECW.
Yeah, but, like, it just like, to look at it realistically, like, could anybody really have actually felt that way? Because, like, Bret, from what I have understood, like, Bret did not want to leave.
No, Vince pushed him out.
Yeah, like, Vince was basically the one that was like, no, I can't pay you. Go look to see what you can get. Whereas I feel like Bret would have been happy to renegotiate, or maybe not happy, but he would have been open to, like, okay, instead of this, because remember, Bret Hart was given not a 3-year deal, not a 5-year deal, not a 10-year deal. He had a 20-year deal. 20. That's a huge contract. Like, I feel like if Bret's willing to initially sign a contract saying, yeah, I'm with you guys for 20 years, I feel like he'd be willing to make concessions to stick around if it was the right thing for him to do. If it was the right thing for business. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the contract was set up so that instead of Bret getting $3 million a year for 3 years or whatever it was, he was getting $1 million a year, but he was going to be getting it until he was like 58 years old. So it was almost like completely backloaded. And frankly, I don't understand why Bret would, money. I don't understand why Bret would sign a contract like that, because money now is always better than money later, especially if, you're looking at the possibility, frankly, when that contract was signed in 1996 of the WWF going out of business. And guess what? You don't get your 20-year deal. You get whatever's left of the assets of the WWF, and you're getting pennies on the dollar. But anyway, I just always thought that was ridiculous. This was a really good match. It was probably not as good as I remembered it. I remembered it being like, maybe 4.25, 4.5 stars. It was more like 3.5, 3 3/4. But it was really good, a good brawl. And I'll tell you what, not everyone has good things to say about Shawn Michaels for good reasons, but at the same time, I want to give Shawn credit. He's in Montreal. He's got heat to the point where people are ready to jump the rail and kill him, and yet he's willing to brawl with Bret in the crowd.
Yeah, I think they went out into the crowd a couple of times.
They did,
didn't they? So, like, he was really tempting fate. Like, doing it once is ballsy enough, but they went out there 2 or 3 times, 2 times in the crowd, and then once, like, up the aisleway and back down. But yeah, like, that's a great point, especially the way that Shawn was carrying himself on the way to the ring. Like, he was like picking his nose with the flag, humping it, like sticking it down his pants. Like, he was riling those people up pretty seriously. And, he didn't even need to do all that to rile those people up. He just had that heat to begin with. One thing before we start talking about the match itself too much, to get back to your point that you made initially when you first brought up this main event, is yes, very, very, very big match feel I don't ever remember a time before this match where, I mean, on a like Madison Square Garden show, like a big like production here, where they follow the wrestlers walking from their dressing room to the gorilla position through the curtain. I don't recall that ever happening on WWF before this match. And little stuff like that, presentation things like that, where you as a viewer feel like you are seeing something that you're not supposed to see, that really puts it over the top. That puts the match, like, no matter what happened leading into the match, the video packages, what you hear, what you see on TV, it's already positioned to be a big match. But just that little additional thing production-wise really elevates what is about to happen, I feel like.
Yeah, that was an excellent production perk, and both guys did a really good job. Like, they were both very confident, yet you could still see that they both had a little bit of butterflies. You had Shawn walking with Chyna and Rick Rude and Triple H, and people forget what Chyna was, how novel she was in 1997. I mean, you looked at her on TV, oh my God, where did they get her? And then you got Bret backstage with the Hart Foundation walking to the ring, and it felt really realistic. I agree with you there.
Not only just the Hart Foundation, but was it?
It was Blade.
Yeah, his young son was following behind with a Canadian flag. And it's just like, I don't know whose call it was to have Blade coming down. Well, not in the aisleway, but like through the corridors. But that was, again, such a subtle touch, because it's not just these wrestlers. It's, you know, he's got his son there too. Like, it's more real. It all of that put together, that whole setup makes everything feel so much more real.
Yeah. So anyway, I talked a little bit earlier about this. John Muse emailed me. He's like, you got to see what happened. And I looked, and I didn't know what to make of the finish at the time. I mean, obviously we were all taken aback. You know, is this a work? Is this not a work? What's going on? But I mean, overall, it was a really good match. Do you have any thoughts on the match itself, Emil?
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit different from you. How you stated it, like you remember it being like a little bit better on its most recent viewing. I, on the other hand, like, I didn't remember much of the match itself. I remember it was good. I remember it was like a brawl, but like watching it back now, like, I haven't seen the match in full in probably 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like it's been a while since I revisited this show, and that's why I was so happy I jumped at the chance to do this specific one. It gave me a reason to watch an iconic event. But as I was watching it, I was like, oh, this is a little bit better than I remember it being, because really I remember brawling and the finish. I didn't remember that beautiful yet absolutely gnarly looking vertical suplex Bret Hart gave Shawn Michaels in the aisleway. Oh, that looked so, it was a beautiful looking suplex, but you could tell that sucked so hard to take. It was a hard suplex. It was the same suplex Bret would have done in the ring. Well, now that I say that, those WWF rings were hard as hell anyway.
True.
So maybe it wasn't any different. But like that hard suplex on the outside, you know, like, when Shawn did like that gourd buster on the steps, just nice, snug looking work. The brawling in the crowd, which we talked about, very ballsy thing for Shawn to want to do. They had some good like figure four stuff in the ring, and also wrapped around the ring post. And it was like chaotic in the aisleway when like first Bret decks Pat Patterson, and then later on Shawn is like hitting referees. It was a chaotic match, very fun, and honestly better than I remember it being. only because I don't remember much of the match. That said, the finish obviously is, what goes down in history. But like the moments right before that happening are pretty funny to me too, because like, when's the last time you saw Bret Hart come off the top rope?
Yeah, really. That was not in his forte. Second rope, usually.
Yeah, and he came off the top, and Shawn brings Hebner into it. Hebner takes a bump. And that's the thing that I forgot. Like obviously, going into it, sharpshooter by Shawn Michaels. He gets it on, ring the bell, whatever. But I totally forgot what led into that. And when Bret's going to the top, I'm like, what the hell is he doing? And then it led right into the finish. I was like, I do not remember it being like this at all. But, I was laughing to myself as I was watching that. Just seeing Bret Hart come off the top rope is hilarious to me.
Now, for those who don't know what happened, which is probably limited to a guest in your car listening to this podcast who really doesn't listen to wrestling, what they did, they couldn't come up with a finish for this match, or Bret was being, they couldn't come up with an agreement for this match. They decided, okay, they agreed we're going to go to a double countout. But what actually happened is Shawn Michaels put Bret Hart in Bret Hart's signature hold, which was known as the sharpshooter, and the referee starts flailing his arms around, and Vince McMahon says, ring the bell, and the bell rings, and that's it, and Shawn Michaels is the new WWF champion. That is known as a screw job. Bret did not agree to that finish, but it's the finish that he got. I said we weren't going to dwell on this, but we certainly have to touch on it. Emil, my take on this was that it was absolutely not a work, and I will explain why. I get that wrestling is a strange business, and especially in 1997, you just couldn't take anything at face value, right? I can see maybe a year later, maybe even 5 years later, people thinking, well, maybe it's a work. But it's been 25 years now, and by now someone would have broken the news. It's human nature. I know something you don't, and I'm going to tell you about it. I do it on this podcast. Jim Cornette, since he got his podcast, has been saying that, no, it wasn't a work, and I was the one who suggested the finish to Vince McMahon. Jim Cornette, whether you agree with him on everything, whether you like him, one thing Jim Cornette isn't is he is a liar. He's not going to go around 25 years later saying that, yeah, this is a work. It wasn't a work. That's not going to happen. Also, the other reason I don't think it was a work, biggest reason, is Bret coming. If I were Bret Hart's agent, I've said this on the show before, right after this match, I'm like, okay, Bret, you're going to do your 3 years in WCW, and then you're coming back here because this is where the money is. And Bret refused to have anything to do with the WWF for 12 years. He signed an extension with WCW. I mean, he didn't want to go where the money was. There's no way in the world I think this is a work. Emil, what are your thoughts on that subject?
That was real life. What we saw was as close to real life as you could possibly get, I think, at that point in time. I don't think there's too many things, there's too many moving parts for this to be considered a work. And it all goes back. I feel like Bret was loyal to WWF, and even if something happened and he did have to go to WCW for other reasons, I feel like he would have been very open to come back to WWF. I feel like the only thing that could have broken Bret's, feeling like that is if his trust in that company is broken, and they broke his trust.
Yeah, they did.
And I know people who are very strong in their convictions that way. Like once you break somebody's trust, you're not going to get it back. for a very, like, if you do, it's going to be a very long time. And, Bret is absolutely one of those guys. Hell, you can hear about it whenever he talks about Goldberg to this day. And, you know, I'm not saying that to like rip on Bret or anything, because he's very justified to have those opinions that he does about the Montreal situation, about Bill Goldberg. You know, he's very justified to feel however he wants to feel about all of those things. But I feel like if they were able to come to an agreement to have this figured out, to hash it out with the championship, to get it on Shawn, or to have Bret drop it to somebody else and then get it to Shawn, whatever. I feel like if they were able to mediate that whole process, that Bret, even if there was so many hard feelings after leaving, he would have come back. But something like this, you can't do to somebody like Bret and have it be okay.
Yeah. I mean, if it were a work, Bret would have just laughed it off and he would have returned after that contract. And,
Yeah.
you know, he did not just laugh it off. And that's why I believe, you know, to this day, there's no way it was a work. Emil, I want to thank you for being on the show. I know you're very busy with your GCW commitments, and thank you for taking the time. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I was really delighted when your message came into my DMs on Twitter, because, you know, like I said, in my formative years, you know, one of the first websites that I found myself on when I was on the internet in 96, 97 was your website. Like, I would look at that all the time, and like that's really how I kind of learned my wrestling history, because it was all in one like list sort of format, and I would be able to read from, you know, these 2-3 months in WWF from this listing, and then, okay, what's the next 2-3 months looking like from the next listing on the tape? And, you know, I was able to piece things together through that. So being able to actually talk to you about a very historic wrestling show was a really fun, it's a really fun experience for me. And thank you so much for having me. I'd be down to do it anytime.
Well, thank you, Emil. And you know what? I genuinely appreciate and take pride in what you said. Now, I'm going to end this podcast. Well, before I thank everybody else, I want to read what was in the Observer about the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels fiasco. It will go down in history as the single most famous finish of a pro wrestling match in the modern era. 20 or 30 years from now, here we are 25, more than any famous wrestler jumping promotions, more than any prominent death, and more than any record-setting house, this will be remembered vividly by all who watched it live and remembered it as legendary from all of those who hear about it later. Through the magic of videotape, the last minute of this match will live forever and be replayed literally millions of times by tens of thousands of people, all looking for the most minute pieces of detail to this strange puzzle. That's what Dave wrote as soon as it happened. I want to thank everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with another Stick to Wrestling. Once again, I want to thank Emil J for being on the show and being the guest. I want to thank Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network for giving me this forum. I want to thank Lou Kippelman for all of the great work he does producing this show. And this has been a production. Oh, one last thing. This is the last show before Thanksgiving. This comes out the Friday before Thanksgiving. Everyone have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. This has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. Go Vols.
This concludes our podcast day.